Tonight, we step back through the veil of millennia to the scorched banks of the Nile. Beyond the shimmering golden masks and towering pyramids lies a brutal, unforgiving truth. What if you were trapped for just 24 hours in the heart of ancient Egypt? A kingdom of monoliths, predator-filled waters, and a relentless, burning sky. Here, the pharaoh is a living deity, and you are merely a fragile speck of dust. Extinguish the lights, the shadows are waiting. Tonight, we step back through the veil of millennia, drifting to the scorched banks of the Nile. We enter a realm dominated by towering stone monuments, absolute divine rulers, and deities who track your every breath from the shadows. Yet, beneath the shimmering golden masks and monumental sanctuaries lies a brutal, unforgiving truth. Tonight, we ask a single question. What would happen if you were trapped for just 24 hours in the heart of ancient Egypt? Let me tell you, the burning desert sun is only the first thing that will tear your flesh apart. Before you surrender to the rhythm of this journey, take a brief moment to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly find value in the dark tales we uncover here. Tell me in the comments below where you are listening from and what hour of the night it is in your corner of the world. It is always deeply fascinating to see who walks beside us through the darkness of history. Now extinguish the lights. Perhaps turn on a fan to let its rhythmic, quiet hum fill the silence around you. Let us slide gently into the shadows of the ancient world together. Welcome to the Kingdom of Egypt, a landscape of monoliths, unforgiving gods, and a relentless, burning sky that bleeds violence upon the earth. Long before your eyes can adjust to the light, the scorching sun is already piercing through the fragile reeds of your primitive hut, projecting its raw power like a cruel deity demanding complete submission. There are no heavy drapes here, no protective shades, and certainly no modern comforts to cool the air. There is only the absolute, suffocating heat of the desert, baking the clay world and your fragile body before the day can even truly begin. You find yourself resting upon a coarse straw mat, covered by a thin sheet of linen that offers nothing more than an illusion of safety from the elements. The gentle Nile breeze, often promised in romantic historical accounts, is completely absent. It perished somewhere in the deep mists of 2800 BC. By the time you force yourself to step outside, the oppressive atmosphere is already rising toward 90 degrees Fahrenheit, or nearly 32 degrees Celsius, and the morning has barely begun to unfold. The sun in this ancient land does not merely illuminate, it aggressively assaults your senses. Your light linen tunic feels completely useless, clinging to your skin like damp paper inside a roaring furnace. Do not dare to dream of modern protection. There is no soothing plant extract, no chemical block, not even a simple wide hat to shield your face from the blinding glare. The wealthy elite and the temple priests possessed rare, protective unguents, but unless you belong to those high circles, such luxuries will never touch your skin. Your only desperate shield is to cover your limbs in thick mud or foul crocodile dung, which might prevent you from transforming into a burning human torch. The emphasis remains entirely on the word might. By noon, the exposed stones beneath your bare feet are hot enough to boil grains. Relief from the glare is an unattainable luxury. Trees are rare omens in this vast ocean of sand. You might find a momentary sanctuary huddled behind a crumbling mud brick wall, but even the bricks are weeping from the intense radiation by this hour. You, meanwhile, resemble a fragile vessel thrown into a massive clay kiln and left to burn without a thought. Yet, you must never let a single complaint escape your lips. Ra, the supreme sun god, is watching your every movement from his celestial throne. In this ancient land, the sun was never just weather. It was the ultimate manifestation of divine wrath and authority. The more torturous the heat, the more supreme Ra felt in his celestial domain. So, as your flesh melts beneath the glare, look at it as a supreme spiritual compliment from the heavens. Survival in this desert kingdom demands absolute hydration, deep humility, and a terrifying tolerance for feeling like a beast being roasted alive over an open flame. And this is merely the opening hour of your day. You have finally dragged your aching body away from the scratchy straw mat. The only comforting thought is that the sacred river is just a short journey from your doorstep. However, a foul warning reaches your senses long before the water comes into view. This is the majestic Nile, the true lifeblood of the civilization, worshipped as a holy entity and the sole reason mankind survived in this barren wilderness. Yet, if we strip away the myth, it smells precisely like an old fish market rotting under the weight of a stagnant swamp. The muddy banks are a chaotic swarm of buzzing flies, primordial frogs, and strange creatures that should not possess legs, but somehow do. Despite the filth, this is the grand basin where you must cleanse yourself. Soap remains an undiscovered concept of the future, and even if some primitive form existed, your empty pockets could never afford it. Instead, you look to the most prominent cleansing technology of the era, coarse desert sand. You rub the rough, burning grains directly against your raw skin, and convince yourself it is proper care. It feels exactly like nature's own coarse sandpaper, only far more painful and infinitely less effective. The act of washing your garments is also tied to the riverbanks. It is a violent process of beating fabrics against jagged stones while silently praying that an apex predator does not mistake your movements for an easy midday meal. To heighten the terror, one must also endure the foul waste drifting down from the settlements upstream. Remember, every citizen, herd of livestock, and sacred funeral vessel shares this exact body of water. Yet, by the standards of the ancient world, this is considered pure. You scrub, you rinse, and you finally step out onto the bank feeling slightly less greasy, though infinitely more anxious about the hidden parasites clinging to your flesh. If you were an elite citizen dwelling within the stone walls of Memphis or Thebes, you might have access to a clean public cistern, but for the common soul, it is the muddy river or absolute dehydration. Do not dare to expect a moment of isolation. This is a crowded public space shared by entire generations, aggressive neighbors, working cattle, and the occasional wild bird pecking at your heels as if it ruled the land. Clay jars are filled to the brim and balanced precariously upon heads, carried back toward your sweltering home before the midday sun turns the clay walls into an oven. It is a relentless daily ritual, deeply spiritual, entirely necessary, and profoundly traumatic. The Nile is indeed holy. It provides sustenance, washes away the grime, and keeps death at bay. But we must never mistake it for a pristine paradise. In truth, it is one part miracle, one part toxic hazard, and the only hope you have of surviving another hour. By this point, you have immersed your body in the predator-filled waters of the river. You have scraped your flesh semi-clean with sand, and your limbs feel as dry as a withered fruit. It is finally time for breakfast, the most vital yet utterly unglamorous event of your existence. Let us banish all modern illusions from your mind. There are no elegant platters, no fresh fruit baskets, and absolutely no refreshing drinks to wake you up. Eating in this kingdom is not a social event. It is a cold, tactical refueling operation designed to keep your heart beating. You take a seat upon a crude wooden stool if your house is fortunate enough to have one, or you simply squat in the dirt corner of the room like the rest of the lower class. The undisputed center of your morning table is bread. Devoid of lightness, it is a dense, dark loaf that feels as tough to chew as an old leather strap. It is forged from crude emmer wheat or rough barley, baked inside primitive clay structures that are routinely patrolled by desert rodents. Do not be startled when you feel coarse sand grinding against your teeth with every single bite. It is not an intentional seasoning. It is merely the persistent remnant of the heavy stone mills used to crush the grain. You can consider it your mandatory daily dose of earth minerals. To wash down this heavy brick, you are handed a cup of beer. But erase all thoughts of a crisp, cold drink from your mind. This is a thick, murky, lukewarm sludge, liquid bread in its purest form. It resembles an unrefined porridge more than an intoxicating drink. It is a heavy mixture dense with raw calories and slightly fermented, a brutal survival smoothie tasting of sour grain and pure endurance. Even the youngest children consume it regularly, not out of malice, but because it is infinitely safer than pouring raw river water into their fragile systems. The intense brewing process at least burns away the deadly microscopic monsters, unlike the Nile, which we have established is a swirling petri dish of infection. If fortune truly smiles upon your house, you might receive a single raw onion or a couple of dried figs to accompany this dense, carbonated meal. True protein only enters the equation if a relative managed to pull a fish from the river and did not consume it raw on the spot. As you force the rock-like loaf down your throat and sip the fermenting grain sludge, swarms of insects circle your head like an unruly crowd at a feast. Because to them, your face is the feast. You desperately swat at them with a stained hand, balancing your clay cup with the other, trying to block out the grim realization that this poor meal is likely the absolute best nourishment you will receive for the rest of the day. Breakfast here is never about pleasure. It is entirely about utility. It injects just enough base energy into your muscles to keep you upright until the next time a master hands you another sand-filled block of baked stone. You have swallowed your gritty meal, consumed your thick ale, and gathered just enough basic strength to function. Now, the time has come to face the true master of your destiny, labor. Trust me when I tell you that ancient physical work makes modern exhaustion look like a luxury retreat. Unless you were born as an elite scribe, a high priest, or a member of the royal bloodline, which, let us be entirely realistic, you were not. Your existence is reduced to raw muscle, suffocating dust, and heavy stones. There are no cooled offices here, no scheduled rests, and no comforts for your aching joints. There is only sweat, burning sand, and the terrifying certainty that your body might give out before the sun reaches its peak. If your fate is tied to the earth as a common peasant, you will find yourself standing deep in the dark mud of the river valley before the first ray of light cuts through the dark. You will spend your hours tearing out stubborn weeds or burying barley seeds under the cold gaze of a ruthless overseer whose sole purpose in life appears to be screaming orders into the heat. Your tools are crude wooden instruments, heavy sickles, and your bare, bleeding hands. If your spine burns with agony, do not despair. That simply means your body is doing exactly what it was bred to do. If you are assigned to the construction crews, the reality becomes even more terrifying. Imagine dragging multi-ton blocks of limestone to build eternal sanctuaries under a blinding sky, navigating steep ramps made of loose gravel and desperate prayers without a single scrap of leather on your feet. There is no mercy to be found on these slopes. If your foot slips, a shattered limb is met with nothing more than a cold shrug from the taskmaster. Descending into the valleys of the dead to carve out the royal tombs is a completely different level of torment. You spend your life hammering against solid rock, carving grand burial chambers for rulers who will rest in luxury for eternity while you die in the dust. If your chisel slips and ruins a sacred hieroglyph inside a pharaoh's eternal house, your termination from the job might involve being sealed inside that very chamber to rot alongside a royal curse. Even the women are denied a moment of rest. Domestic life is a relentless cycle of heavy physical toil, grinding grains until the wrists snap, carrying massive water vessels over miles, weaving rough fabrics, managing children, and still rushing to the fields to assist under the sun. Your only moment of peace is the few minutes the newborn closes its eyes. As you prepare the meager evening meal, you eat while moving. You wipe the stinging sweat from your brow with a torn sleeve. You keep pushing forward because to slow your pace means falling behind the mandatory quota. And falling behind means your small ration of grain is stripped away, leaving you with nothing but the whip. There is no clocking out in this land. The sun is your absolute master. When it finally dips below the edge of the world, you crawl back to your hut half dead, coated in a thick shell of dust, dreaming of a life with softer ground and a far less murderous deity. Work in this empire is not merely difficult, it is an absolute sentence of survival. It is relentless. It is a total sensory submission to endurance twilight after twilight until your bones crack or your master decides you are no longer worth a handful of grain. And that is not even the darkest truth of your existence. After draining your life force out in the burning soil or stone pit, you might feel a desperate urge to murmur, perhaps a quiet breath of despair, a faint question of why your back must break, or a silent plea for a moment of peace. Extinguish that thought instantly, because in this ancient kingdom, a single murmur is not merely a social mistake. It is an act of absolute treason against the cosmos. Why? Because your absolute ruler is not some common mortal. He is a living deity on earth. The pharaoh is not a mere human chosen by a council or born into a fortunate bloodline. He is the physical manifestation of Horus himself, the sacred son of Ra, appointed by the heavens to dominate this land and maintain Ma'at, the fragile eternal order of the universe. In other words, if the great river floods the fields perfectly, you must offer your deepest praise to the pharaoh. If the waters fail and famine strikes, it simply means your devotion was too weak to move the heavens. Questioning his divine decree is not an offense. It is pure blasphemy against the gods. Speaking ill of his shadow will instantly earn you the bite of a heavy whip, a life bound in cold iron chains, or a forced descent into the dark underworld without a single protective charm to shield your soul. You are forced to stare at his grand visage everywhere you look, carved into monumental stones, painted on towering temple walls, stamped onto basic trade, and even pressed into clay bread molds. His sacred name is chanted in every midnight ritual. His dark silhouette is drawn larger than the mountains in every mural. That is not an artistic choice. That is the supreme law of the empire. Yet, do not dare to dream you will ever truly gaze upon his face. If you belong to the lower class, the closest you will ever come to his presence is catching a fleeting glimpse of a golden sacred bark floating down the river during a chaotic religious festival. If you blink, he is gone, returning to a monumental palace you are forbidden to ever approach, protected by ruthless ministers, armed sentinels, silent scribes, and an ocean of gold vast enough to buy a foreign empire, which in truth he routinely does. If your fate forces you to break your bones for a royal monument, whether it be a hidden tomb, a massive temple, or a stone statue that blocks out the horizon, you must bow with divine ecstasy. At least, that is the official decree of the state. You repeat those words with absolute obedience, because pretending you are profoundly honored to split granite for 14 hours a day is your only shield against a sudden execution. Do not let the illusion of rebellion cross your mind. The divine rulers crush uprisings faster than a dynasty can rise to power. You could ask the citizens of the last settlement that dared to withhold their grain taxes from the palace. Oh wait, you cannot. That village no longer exists on the map. So yes, the pharaoh is a living god. And you are merely a fragile speck of dust allowed to bleed in his holy name. Now return to your labor. If you believed surviving beneath that murderous sun was your greatest torment, wait until you realize that in this kingdom, sand is your eternal shadow, your companion, your bitter seasoning, and your ultimate mortal executioner. It is completely inescapable. It rests in your garments, inside your straw bedding, and deep within the food you chew. There is no sanctuary from its presence. You could be working the earth, offering a prayer, trying to sleep, or walking through the crowded market stalls. Without warning, a sudden gust of burning desert wind will strike, turning your face into a raw, bleeding canvas of grit you never wished to endure. Let us look at your garments first. You wear thin linen. It is light and breathable, Yet it is about as effective at blocking the sand as a broken reed basket is at holding back the waters of the Nile. The sharp grains slide effortlessly down your collar, cling to your sweat-drenched skin, and find their way into the deepest creases of your body. Attempting to eat. Good luck! Every single loaf of bread you touch is a miniature sand trap. Because the grain is crushed between massive stone slabs, tiny fragments of jagged rock inevitably merge with the flour dough. The citizens did not merely consume their emmer wheat, they chewed through their own millstones with every meal. This is the exact reason why ancient skeletal remains reveal teeth worn down as smooth and flat as river pebbles. Imagine chewing your basic morning ration while filing your teeth down to the raw nerve day after day. And if you held on to the hope that your home was a safe sanctuary from the dust, erase that thought. Your primitive mudbrick hut is full of cracks, structural flaws, and open windows completely devoid of glass. They are perfect gateways for the wind-driven ash. Your floors are deeply buried. Your cooking jars are full of dirt. Your sleeping mat is essentially a dust pit disguised as furniture. Footwear is an absolute luxury. The vast majority of the population walks completely barefoot, meaning you are always a single misstep away from transforming your feet into cracked, bleeding leather. If you are fortunate enough to possess shoes, they are merely primitive sandals woven from river reeds. Fashionable in the eyes of the scribes, perhaps. Protective against the burning earth? Not in the slightest. Then come the sandstorms, the ultimate manifestation of divine fury. Sudden, violent, and utterly blinding. One moment you are whispering to a companion, and the next you are coughing up choking dust, feeling as though an entire desert has been violently forced into your eyes. Visibility vanishes into absolute darkness, and every living soul around you is reduced to a coughing, desperate silhouette in the haze. In short, sand is the shadow that never departs, the bitter spice in every single bite of food, and the silent destroyer of your vision, your lungs, and your basic dignity. It is not merely the background of your tragic life. It has become a physical part of your body. And no, you can't wash it off. You already tried to cleanse yourself in the Nile, which is likely holding more sand than water. In this ancient realm, faith is not a casual ritual for the weekend. It is the absolute operating system for your entire existence. Your heavy labor, your meager diet, your cleansing routine, and your midnight fears are all dictated by ancient deities who possess incredibly rigid opinions. First, you must accept this truth. The gods are everywhere. Your settlement contains altars to a dozen different entities, each ruling over a vital force of life. There is Ra, who commands the sun disk across the sky like a celestial voyager. Thoth, the ibis-headed master of wisdom, dominates the scribes and the movements of the moon. Sobuk, part crocodile and part primordial nightmare, rules the deep waters of the Nile. And Batet, the feline protectress, commands the delicate balance of the home. Forget the concept of individual freedom. Your entire daily sequence revolves around maintaining their favor. You wake up to praise the sun, pour a drop of ale onto the dirt, offer an apology to Hathor, and if you stub your toe, you must choke back your curse or risk drawing the wrath of a malicious spirit. Before you touch a piece of bread, you must offer a fragment to the shadows. Before you close your eyes, you must pray that Set, the Lord of Chaos, does not tear your house into existential pieces before the dawn breaks. Even passing away is a multi-day bureaucratic ordeal where the deceased must navigate labyrinthine paths, outsmart monstrous demons, and prove their moral purity or face complete cosmic erasure. Speaking of the afterlife, the inhabitants took the concept of mortality with absolute seriousness. You do not simply perish and cross over to a peaceful rest. Your soul must endure a terrifying trial where your physical heart is placed upon a golden scale opposite the feather of Ma'at, the absolute symbol of cosmic truth and justice. If your heart sinks because of hidden sins, acts of cruelty, or perhaps taking a neighbor's animal, your essence is instantly thrown to Amit, a horrifying hybrid with the jaws of a crocodile, the chest of a lion, and the heavy limbs of a hippopotamus. So yes, even when your breathing stops, you are still on trial before the universe. But here is the strange truth. This intricate, terrifying belief system was not viewed as a burden. It was their only comfort. The people genuinely believed that human life was part of a grand cosmic equilibrium. And if you maintained the daily rituals and protected the principles of order, you were promised a chance at an eternal, peaceful existence, complete with abundant food, reunited ancestors, and perhaps a boat to sail the celestial waters. Of course, the grander your wealth, the more the gods seemed to care about your name. The stone temples were colossal, the priesthood held terrifying authority, and the common peasants simply prayed that the heavens were feeling merciful on that particular afternoon. Because in this empire, devotion is not a choice. It is your permanent job description, your ultimate protection plan, and your mandatory travel itinerary for the deep dark of the next life. You have just stepped upon a jagged stone, suffered a sting from a venomous desert insect, or collapsed from a raging fever, which, in this unforgiving landscape, is simply a standard morning. It is time to seek desperate medical intervention. Just do not expect a clean waiting area or a sterile sanctuary. You are about to be treated with a chaotic mixture of ancient incantations, bitter wild plants, and absolute desperation. First, you will be dragged to a healer. To be entirely fair, these individuals were some of the most perceptive minds of the ancient world. They utilized copper surgical blades, maintained detailed papyrus texts, and possessed a surprisingly accurate map of the human anatomy. But here is the terrifying catch. Empirical science in this land was always bound to a massive dose of dark magic. Your open wound is covered in a thick poultice composed of wild honey, moldy grain, and crushed desert weeds. In truth, honey does possess natural antibacterial properties, and old mold holds the early secrets of penicillin, so the mixture actually works to a degree. But before it ever touches your raw flesh, the priest will chant an aggressive protective spell just to be safe, because you can never be certain if your agonizing stomach cramps are a physical illness or the work of a vengeful phantom or an offended god. Do you suffer from a blinding headache? You might receive a mixture of crushed wild onions rubbed violently into your bare scalp, while a voice recites a heavy hymn to Thoth. Are your lungs burning? Let us smear fresh cattle dung mixed with dried dates directly onto your chest and watch if your spirit breaks. If you catch a blinding eye infection, prepare yourself for a paste composed of lizard blood, mineral dust, and fermenting beer, combined with a loud prayer to the eye of Horus. Surgical procedures did manifest from time to time. Deep abscesses were drained with hot metal, shattered bones were bound with splints, and open gashes were stitched shut using rough linen thread. But there is absolutely no anesthesia to dull the agony. There is only a razor-sharp blade and a muscular companion to pin your shoulders down while you scream your lungs out into a hard mud brick pillow. The state of dental care was utterly disastrous. Remember the relentless sand baked into every loaf of bread? Your teeth are systematically ground down to the gums by the time you reach your 20s. If an infection takes root deep in your jaw, your options are brutally simple. 1. Endure the agonizing pain until you lose your mind. 2. Perish from the spreading venom. Or 3. Have the tooth violently ripped from your jaw using primitive pliers forged by a local blacksmith with zero medical standards. And we must never forget the protective amulets. Whether you're bringing a new life into the world, having a limb stitched together, or simply coughing too loudly, a doctor-priest will inevitably hang a stone charm around your neck. Just in case the true root of your agony is an invisible serpent spirit wrapped tightly around your internal organs. So yes, their medicine had its rare moments of brilliance, but for the most part, you had better pray the gods are listening, because your only true bandage is a desperate incantation spoken into the dark. Here is a historical truth that catches most modern minds completely off guard. Women in this river kingdom possessed far greater legal rights than those in many empires that followed centuries later. They held the power to own vast estates, execute business contracts, demand legal divorce, and even drag an elite man into a public court of law. It sounds remarkably advanced, does it not? But before you prepare your mind for a romanticized time travel vacation of independence, freeze right there. Because while their legal autonomy might seem impressive on papyrus documents, the daily physical reality was utterly devoid of luxury. If your fate was to be born a woman in this desert land, you routinely open your eyes long before the sun breaks the horizon. Your day begins by grinding heavy grains by hand, using a massive, flat stone slab that systematically destroys both the wheat and the vertebrae of your spine. Once that agonizing task is finished, you must march to the banks of the Nile to haul heavy water vessels, prepare the morning meal, manage the chaotic household, feed the livestock, and if the family is struggling, rush directly into the burning fields to assist with the harvest. You are an isolated, one-woman labor force wrapped in a single piece of stained linen. There is no personal time, no moments of rest, and absolutely no relief when a child is on the way. Bringing a child into the world is a terrifying lottery of agony and death. The local midwives offer what comfort they can, certainly, but there are no modern blocks for the pain, no understanding of infection, and no soothing music to calm your panic. You deliver life inside a sweltering, dark room choked with heavy incense smoke, desperate prayers, and the constant fear of a fatal hemorrhage. Let us examine their appearance. The thin linen dresses are light against the heat, but you wear no protective undergarments and no shoes to shield your feet from the burning dirt. The sun blistered your exposed skin, the sand found its way into every intimate fold, and the swarms of river insects viewed your body as an open feast. Do you wish to wear the famous makeup? True, the women did utilize cosmetics daily, but the dark coal is laced with toxic lead and applied using sharp wooden splinters that resemble primitive toothpicks. Now, if your soul was fortunate enough to be born into the high elite noble houses, your existence was admittedly softer. You might learn to decipher the glyphs, manage the immense accounts of a grand estate, or enter the stone temples as a holy priestess. If you belong to the ultimate royal lineage, you could even seize absolute power as pharaoh, just like Hatshepsut or the legendary Cleopatra, who dominated the ancient world with brilliant strategy and terrifyingly sharp eyeliner. But if your family was poor, your legal equality did nothing to soften the brutal physical landscape. You labored, you bled, you bent your spine, you carried water, you gave birth, you buried your dead, and you prayed to the shadows. You were not enslaved by the text of the law, but by the relentless rules of base survival. Still, their autonomy was a powerful shield, and it mattered deeply. They could raise their voices in court, protect their family inheritance, and never became the mere property of a husband upon marriage. Compared to the dark status of women in other ancient cultures, that is an immense achievement. So yes, they held rights, but true comfort was a luxury reserved exclusively for stone monuments and distant goddesses. It was never meant for the common woman who stood elbow-deep in raw dough while desperately swatting swarms of flies away from her weeping child. You have somehow survived another grueling 24 hours in this unforgiving kingdom. You have forced the sand-filled bread down your throat, carried the heavy water vessels, avoided the sudden wrath of the living pharaoh, and perhaps even outlasted a violent desert sandstorm. It is finally time to close your eyes and rest, correct? Wrong, because in this ancient empire, your true trial only begins the exact moment your heart stops beating. Passing away is not the conclusion of your story. It is merely the opening chapter of a terrifyingly bureaucratic, multi-layered journey through the dangerous paths of the underworld. And if you believed your earthly labor master was ruthless, wait until you stand face to face with the deities of final judgment. First, your wandering spirit must take a perilous journey to the monumental hall of Ma'at. Here, standing before a terrifying tribunal of 42 distinct deities, you are forced to declare your absolute innocence in what stands as the oldest legal deposition in human history. You must look into their cold eyes and proclaim, "I have not stolen the bread of the weak. I have not spoken lies to my elders. I have not coveted the livestock of my neighbor," all the while silently praying that the gods cannot see the hidden darkness in your mind. Then comes the ultimate trial of the heart. Quite literally, your heart, venerated as the absolute seat of all human memory and emotion, is cut from your spirit and placed upon a golden scale opposite the sacred feather of Ma'at, the cosmic emblem of truth, justice, and perfect universal balance. If your heart sinks lower than the feather, it is an irrefutable sign that you lived a life of hidden malice and sin. That is the exact moment Ammit steps forward from the shadows. Part roaring lion, part aggressive crocodile, part heavy hippopotamus, and entirely forged from your deepest nightmares. She does not arrest your spirit. She does not demand a penance. She violently devours your soul, ripping your essence from the fabric of creation forever. There is no secondary realm for you, no second chance at redemption, just absolute, eternal non-existence. In a culture completely obsessed with the concept of immortality, this total erasure is the ultimate, most terrifying punishment imaginable. And the danger is even more precise. You can doom your eternal soul not just by the weight of your past actions, but by a single misplaced word, a single flawed confession, a single forgotten phrase from the sacred text during your judgment, and instantly, absolute spiritual obliteration. It is exactly like a mandatory examination, where a single mistake results in being physically consumed by a mythological monster of death. If you somehow navigate the traps and pass the scale, congratulations are yours. You are permitted to step into the legendary field of reeds, a pristine, eternal mirror of Egypt where your soul is promised an everlasting existence surrounded by calm waters, abundant harvests, your ancestors, and presumably far fewer sand parasites. But the stakes to reach this paradise are monstrous. This is the sole reason why the entire civilization was completely obsessed with tomb construction, elaborate preservation rituals, and complex magical texts like the Book of the Dead, a vital spiritual cheat sheet filled with heavy spells, protective words, and highly practical advice, such as never mocking the crocodile god. So yes, the next life is a magnificent horizon, but only if you navigate your earthly days with absolute, terrifying precision. A single dark blasphemy, a solitary withheld tribute to the altar, and your soul is instantly condemned to become food for Ammit. Sleep in peace. If there is one singular blessing in this harsh kingdom, it is the touch of linen. The thin, breathable weave of linen. Your entire world and every soul around you relies completely upon this organic plant-based fiber. It is exceptionally light, cool, and allows your skin to find a desperate sanctuary from the intense heat of the desert. That is the initial victory. The tragic realization, however, is that this is the absolute boundary of your comfort. Whether your fate binds you as a field peasant, a stone cutter, a temple servant, or a market merchant, you are trapped in the exact same garment day after day. For the men, a short white loincloth or kilt. For the women, a straight, sleeveless linen tunic, occasionally secured by thick bands, occasionally falling open. If you are born into the wealthy noble class, your fabric might display elegant folds, mineral beads, or intricate designs. If you belong to the lower class, it is a plain white or faded grayish shroud, depending entirely on how many suns have passed since your last journey to the riverbanks. And speaking of the riverbanks, you spend your mornings hand-scrubbing your garments against the rocks of the Nile while constantly scanning the dark water, hoping a territorial hippopotamus does not rise from the depths mid-wash to rip you in half. The vast majority of the population walks entirely barefoot. Sandals forged from tightly woven reeds or rough animal leather are strictly reserved for grand royal ceremonies or the high priests within the sanctuaries. So, unless you belong to the royal bloodline, expect to spend your existence with burning desert dust trapped between your toes and a jagged rock driving deep into your heel. Adornments are common, certainly, but they serve a dark utility. Amulets are worn for spiritual defense. Heavy necklaces display your social rank, and dark-eye cosmetic forged from crushed lead powder was never a mere statement of vanity. It actively absorbed the blinding glare of the sun disk and was believed to shield the eyes from blinding infections. Yes, even your cosmetic mask held a vital duty in this empire. Yet, no matter how flawlessly you drape your fabric, the desert insects remain completely indifferent. Swarms of flies, biting gnats, and bloodthirsty mosquitoes view your light garment as an open invitation. You move through your existence in a state of perpetual warfare, swatting at the air, rubbing thick perfumed fats onto your limbs, and praying that your linen shroud does not stick to your torso like a wet burial sheet the precise moment the sun reaches its full, terrifying zenith. And of course, your garment remains completely unchanged through the cycle of the year because this land is devoid of true seasons. There is only intense heat and slightly less oppressive heat. Therefore, your linen ensemble is your permanent, year-round shroud, whether the desert is a blazing furnace or a cold 70-degree twilight. So yes, the garments of Egypt were light, elegant, and infinitely more tolerable than the heavy wool the Romans would endure centuries later. But do not let the illusion of the breezy fabric deceive your mind, because no matter how weightless your tunic feels against your skin, your existence remains heavily burdened by agonizing labor, blinding heat, shifting sands, and swarms of insects that refuse to grant your physical form a single moment of isolation. You have managed to outlast another blinding Egyptian sun, dragging massive blocks through the dust, outmaneuvering violent sandstorms, and praying your fragile shroud does not tear apart mid-labor. But in this ancient land, survival is always an illusion, because no matter how resilient your spirit may be, your breath will likely fade before you reach the age of 35. Let us dissect the numbers. If your soul manages to survive the perils of infancy, which is an immense victory in itself, considering the child mortality rates were staggeringly high, you are violently thrust straight into the burdens of adulthood by the tender age of 13. Sacred marriage, heavy physical labor, and raising the next generation of workers all begin early because, in truth, your hourglass is running out of sand. You could perish from sudden sunstroke, an infected scratch on your hand, the agony of childbirth, a river predator, a scorpion strike from the dust, or a piece of contaminated bread. And you must banish all thoughts of modern medicine. If a raging fever takes hold of your body, your absolute best hope is a poultice of wild honey, raw herbs, and a desperate prayer that the deities do not have a different destination for your lingering soul. But here is the profound twist. The people of this empire did not live in terror of their mortality. They meticulously organized for it. In fact, they coordinated their transition into the afterlife with far greater precision than modern humans plan for their retirement. If your house possesses wealth, you commission a monumental tomb, the ancient equivalent of a 5-star eternal palace. You begin hoarding rare grave offerings, precious jewelry, jars of dried food, sacred perfumes, statuettes, and even small wooden servant figures known as ushabtis to perform your heavy duties in the next realm. You can view them as your permanent spiritual servants who will toil while your soul rests for eternity. Your physical vessel is carefully eviscerated, wrapped in endless layers of linen, packed with natron salt, and placed neatly into a brightly painted sarcophagus. You are buried alongside a handwritten scroll of the Book of the Dead, which is not a text of damnation, but rather a mystical map for your journey, complete with secret passwords for the celestial gates, incantations to blind horrific demons, and precise instructions to avoid being torn apart by soul-devouring entities. If you are born poor, however, your final resting place is merely a shallow trench dug into the shifting sands. Your cold body is wrapped in whatever scrap of fabric your grieving family can spare. Perhaps a single clay jar of beer or bread is placed beside your head before the earth swallows your form. There are no painted walls here, no golden burial masks, just your bones and the whispering wind. Yet, even the most destitute peasants held fast to the beautiful dream of the next life. A serene, fertile wonderland known as the Field of Reeds, where your soul will cultivate crops without a drop of sweat, feast without the agony of hunger, and sail the celestial waters forever beneath a gentle, comforting sun. So yes, your life will likely end abruptly in this ancient land. But if your soul walked in absolute truth, offered the proper sacrifices, and avoided angering the jackal-headed lords of the dark, you just might spend eternity in magnificent style. Your spirit has finally crossed the threshold into the next realm, or at least into the safety of the stone chamber. Your physical vessel has been meticulously drained, wrapped in sacred linen, protected with incantations, and sealed beneath the earth. It is finally time to rest in absolute stillness, correct? In truth, no, because in this ancient empire, even the dead are hunted by the living. Let us confront a brutal reality. The monumental tombs are packed with immense wealth. Golden protective amulets, precious stones, rare aromatic oils, carved wooden icons, chests overflowing with fine fabrics, and for the living pharaohs, literal fleets of treasure designed for the heavens. Every single item is intended to accompany your spirit into eternity. But burying massive wealth inside a stone vault is essentially an open invitation for a desperate soul carrying a bronze chisel and dark intentions. The act of desecrating tombs was so incredibly rampant that it evolved into a permanent societal plague. The divine rulers tried desperately to combat the thieves by carving their eternal chambers deep within jagged cliffs, sealing the paths behind massive stone blocks, and writing terrifying, blood-curdling curses upon the entryways. Inscriptions like, "May the river monster tear your soul from your bones," or "May your flesh be incinerated forever by a serpent forged of living fire." But history reveals a dark truth. The magical curses completely failed to protect the dead. The grave robbers breached the chambers anyway, arriving under the cover of a moonless night, carrying intimate architectural knowledge of the traps. Occasionally, they were local villagers driven by desperation. Occasionally, they were the corrupt builders who had helped construct the very vaults they were now violating. In some shocking records, even the temple priests and the tomb sentinels were part of the criminal syndicates, despite the punishments for being captured being absolute agony. We are speaking of brutal public floggings, physical dismemberment, forced exile into the wilderness, or being impaled alive. Yet, when you calculate the astronomical value of the stolen goods, particularly the pure gold and the rare temple incense, the terrifying risk appeared entirely worth the danger. After all, the mummified dead cannot raise a blade to defend their treasure. But it was not merely the elite noble vaults that were targeted by the thieves. Even the shallow trenches of the common peasants were violently disrupted. The poorest citizens might only be buried with a small clay pot of ale or a single loaf of wheat for their eternal journey. Yet, even that meager offering was worth stealing in a world where famine was a constant shadow. Food was desperately scarce. Copper tools held immense value, and clean linen functioned as raw currency. The ultimate tragedy of this land is that tomb desecration was not always driven by pure malice or greed. Sometimes it was the only way to avoid starvation. The empire endured devastating droughts, complete political collapses, and foreign invasions. A starving laborer would break through the sacred mud bricks not for gold, but for survival. And when your own children are crying out in the dirt from hunger, a collection of funeral offerings looks far less like a sacred relic and far more like a life-saving meal. So, in this ancient valley, you are never truly safe simply because your heart has stopped beating. Your eternal sanctuary can be plundered, your sacred name violently scraped from the stone, and your wrapped mummy torn apart by a desperate soul carrying a pickaxe and devoid of moral fear. Rest in eternal peace. Only if the living never discover the coordinates of your bones. We have all gazed upon them with wonder. Those magnificent, deeply cryptic symbols carved into the massive walls of the sun-drenched temples and silent tombs. Majestic birds, wide eyes, coiled serpents, sacred lotus flowers, and human silhouettes walking sideways as if trapped in a rigid, eternal performance. These are the ancient hieroglyphs, visually mesmerizing, yet monumentally complex to master. True, they possess a haunting beauty, but attempting to decipher their meaning is an entirely different matter. These symbols were never mere decorative artwork. They comprised a highly sophisticated, fully realized writing system containing over 700 distinct characters, a number that grew larger as the centuries advanced. Certain symbols represent an entire physical object or concept. Others signify specific phonetic sounds, and a vast number function as determinatives designed to clarify the exact context of a sentence. Because, as you can imagine, writing the concept of a star using a literal drawing of a star might be far too simple for the scribes. And do not dare to expect spacing between words or modern punctuation. The writing of this empire was essentially one continuous, breathtaking riddle wrapped in artistic mastery, completely devoid of vowels, and demanding an absolute understanding of context. Furthermore, it could be etched from left to right to left, or from top to bottom, depending entirely on the artistic whim of the master scribe on that specific afternoon. The secret to unlocking the text? You must carefully observe which direction the carved birds or human faces are looking. That is your absolute compass for reading. If the figures are facing toward the right, you must read from the right. If they look toward the left, you read from the left. And if the symbols are drawn upside down, may the gods guide your mind. Learning the art of the sacred glyphs was completely closed to the common populace. True literacy was an exceptionally rare gift. Perhaps a single % of the entire population could actually decipher or write the symbols. If you wished to enter this exclusive circle, your path required you to train as a professional scribe, which demanded a lifetime of brutal, relentless education beginning in early childhood. You were forced to memorize hundreds of complex glyphs, copy endless papyrus scrolls, and practice your lines so intensely that your fingers would likely warp into a permanent claw by the age of 15. But the societal reward for this agony was immense. The scribes were profoundly respected, exceptionally well-fed, and were completely exempted from ever dragging heavy limestone bricks beneath the burning sun. Instead, they recorded tax tallies, drafted legal court documents, penned royal correspondence, and preserved sacred mythological texts. They were the essential machinery of the state, protected from the horrors of physical labor. In a Bronze Age world where the written word was the ultimate power, the scribes dominated the empire quietly from the shadows of the temples. For the rest of the common population, however, the text was a force of literal magic. The people genuinely believed that the hieroglyphs held divine, supernatural power. Writing a mortal's name upon stone preserved their soul for eternity. Scraping that name away resulted in absolute, terrifying spiritual annihilation. Therefore, a single error in spelling held the power of life and death. So while these carvings might resemble a collection of ancient visual icons to a modern observer, they are in reality a complex linguistic puzzle wrapped in myth, mathematics, and deep mystery. Beautiful to behold? Unquestionably. Simple to learn? Absolutely not. After 14 chapters of suffocating heat, relentless hunger, burning sand, dark superstition, and back-breaking physical torment, the hour has arrived to confront the ultimate question. Would your modern soul survive a single 24-hour cycle in ancient Egypt? Let us strip away all illusions and speak with absolute honesty. You would almost certainly perish. It is incredibly easy for the modern mind to romanticize this vanished empire from a distance. We envision golden burial masks, air scented with blooming lotus, elegant rows of hieroglyphs, powerful deities bearing the heads of fierce animals, and a civilization defined by cosmic order and aesthetic beauty. But behind those iconic monuments and the breathtaking artwork lies a landscape of brutal, merciless realities that spared absolutely no one outside the elite inner circles of the palace. The standard day for a common citizen initiated upon a cold dirt floor, surrounded by a swirling cloud of river flies, and bound to the grim realization that if your muscles did not labor today, your body would not consume a single crumb of bread tonight. You walked completely barefoot across sand hot enough to sear flesh, carried crushing vessels of river water, prepared your meals over open smoke fires, and lived your existence shoulder to shoulder with swarming insects, choking ash, and livestock. You spent your hours consumed by the fear of sudden disease, immediate divine retribution, and whether a venomous desert serpent might slither into your straw sleeping mat during the dark of night. You possessed no means to cleanse your teeth, no advanced medicine to break a fever, and zero retirement plans for your aging joints. And if your house was incredibly fortunate, you owned perhaps 2 changes of basic linen fabric to your name. You bowed before a tyrannical god-king who possessed the absolute authority to seize your family land with a single spoken decree, a climate that systematically cooked your flesh by midday, and a rigid religion that demanded your soul pass a literal courtroom examination before the gods after death just to gain entry into the peaceful version of the next world. Let us also not overlook the basic necessities you completely lack in this land. No life-saving antibiotics, no protection against the sun, zero personal privacy, no plumbing infrastructure, no remedies for physical pain, and absolutely no method of escape. The exact moment you were born into a specific social class, your destiny was sealed forever. There were no promotions to be earned, no shifts in career paths, and no journey of self-discovery to pursue. You were either a silent scribe, a sun-baked farmer, a broken laborer, an exhausted mother, a desperate servant, or a skeleton in the sand. And yet, despite this overwhelming weight of survival, the inhabitants of this valley were not trapped in permanent misery. They maintained a profound, unbreakable devotion to their deities, a clear understanding of their earthly purpose, and a deep appreciation for the fleeting beauty of life. They cherished the sound of music, the release of dance, the joy of a shared meal, the warmth of family, and the celebration of grand religious festivals. They shared humor. They painted vibrant colors onto mud walls. They conceptualized the geometry of eternity with such absolute clarity that they raised stone monuments that still dominate the horizon of our modern world. But for a person of the modern era, stripped of your cooled air conditioning, your purified drinking water, your chemical pain relief, your protective footwear, and your digital connection to the world, your spirit would completely break before the second desert sandstorm could even hit your face. So no, your soul would not outlast a single day in this ancient valley. But that is entirely acceptable, because the people of the Nile endured for thousands of years. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is the exact reason why their shadows still haunt our thoughts today. Deep within the sacred heart of ancient Teotihuacan, a single colossal pyramid stands as a dark monument that refuses to fade from memory. Its weathered stone surface is not decorated with peaceful icons of faith, gentle depictions of creation, or comforting deities, but rather with snarling, open-mouthed stone serpents, dozens upon dozens of them. They project violently from the facade of the temple as if frozen by a curse mid-strike, their massive fangs completely exposed, their blank eyes staring wide into the void. This is the ominous temple of the feathered serpent, recognized by the cultures of the valley as the sanctuary of Quetzalcoatl. But unlike the surrounding pyramids that ascend toward the heavens with an air of quiet reverence, this particular structure projects a fundamentally different energy. It feels predatory. From the exact moment your shadow approaches its base, an eerie, suffocating sensation takes hold of your mind. The feeling that you are being intensely watched by forces from the dark. Those carved stone reptilian heads were never intended as simple decoration or artistic flair. They functioned as absolute warnings to the mortal world, physical emblems of unmitigated divine wrath and terror. And beneath their eternal, stone-cold gaze, something profoundly horrific once unfolded. Comprehensive archaeological excavations carried out over the past few decades have pulled back the earth to reveal a truth that the scholars never anticipated. Entombed directly beneath the massive stone foundations of the pyramid lay far more than simple ceremonial pottery or standard offerings to the earth. The soil held something infinitely more disturbing to human eyes. Human remains, and we are not speaking of a mere handful of skeletons. The earth held the broken bones of over 200 individual bodies, a vast number of them completely decapitated, their hands bound securely behind their backs with thick fiber cords. Young men, likely elite warriors captured in brutal campaigns, entombed in massive groups as part of a highly calculated ritual sacrifice arranged with absolute mathematical precision. Certain individuals were buried with razor-sharp obsidian blades placed precisely at their sides, while others wore macabre necklaces forged from actual human teeth or elaborate ornaments crafted from the raw jawbones of fallen foes. These souls were never simply tossed into a mass grave in a moment of chaos. They were deliberately, meticulously positioned in specific geometric configurations of profound symbolic and astrological significance. It is chillingly clear that this was not a place of chaotic slaughter. It was a calculated divine transaction, a cosmic message carved into the very stone of the valley and sealed forever with an ocean of human blood. But what manner of belief system possesses the power to justify such a monumental horror on this scale? What hidden forces demanded that so many human breaths be extinguished simultaneously beneath the earth? The Temple of the Feathered Serpent was far more than a mere house of prayer or a religious monument. It functioned as a grand theater of terror and absolute power, a sacred stage where the ruling elite violently fused cosmic mythology, total warfare, and psychological fear to maintain an iron grip over a sprawling metropolis containing more than 100,000 living souls. And this systematic, ritualistic bloodletting may have been the terrifying price demanded by the dark to keep the entire universe from collapsing into absolute chaos. As you stand before this immense monument today, gazing directly into the hollow eyes of those stone serpents, you are not merely looking at an ancient piece of art or a marvel of engineering. You are looking straight into the soul of a dark civilization that believed the gods required blood to breathe, and that they possessed every absolute right to spill it. But who were these people, who commanded such terrifying violence like a sacred duty and vanished into the depths of history without leaving a single trace? The answer to all these questions lies deeply hidden within the massive, looming shadows of Teotihuacan. Long before the Aztec Empire was ever established, before the Maya carved their complex cosmic calendars into solid stone, a metropolis unlike any other was rising in the heart of the Americas, Teotihuacan. This name, given later by the Aztecs who arrived in the region, literally translates to the place where gods were born. And the moment you begin walking down its vast avenue of the dead, closely flanked by giant pyramids that scrape the heavens, you start to truly feel the chilling grandeur and the absolute desperation behind that title. At its peak around 100 to 250 CE, Teotihuacan was a sprawling metropolis housing over 100,000 citizens, making it one of the largest urban centers in the world at the time, rivaling ancient Rome, Alexandria, and Chang'an in both sheer size and global influence. It was a city meticulously planned, wide boulevards, intersecting grid streets, and multi-story volcanic stone apartment compounds where extended families lived together surrounded the area. And right at the absolute center of this massive settlement, three immense pyramids pierced the sky: the Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Sun, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Yet, there was a massive, dark secret that set Teotihuacan completely apart from all other ancient cities. To this very day, absolutely no one knows who built it. Seriously, there is not a single written record, nor a single royal name carved into stone, to show what these people called themselves, or what their original name was. There is no trace of a king's name, nor a single dynastic archive. Teotihuacan seems to have been ruled not by a lone monarch, but perhaps by a sacred council of priests, a theocracy, or a system entirely foreign to our modern understanding of ancient power. And despite this absolute anonymity, their cultural influence across the continent was colossally massive. Evidence of Teotihuacan's power has been discovered hundreds of miles away, from the distant Maya cities of Tikal and Copan to the Zapotec capital of Monte Alban. Sharp obsidian blades, distinct ceramic styles, elaborate murals, and even direct political assassinations stood as absolute proof of this reach. Historical records suggest that Teotihuacan emissaries overthrew a local Maya king to install a loyal puppet ruler who would serve their interests perfectly. But how did this mysterious city, possessing no known writing system, maintain such absolute authority across Mesoamerica? The answer lay in how flawlessly they merged cosmic ideology with statecraft. Their temples were far more than simple places of worship. They were theaters of power, perfectly aligned with celestial events, where terrifying rituals were staged to strike fear into the masses. It served as a constant reminder to both citizens and foreign visitors that Teotihuacan was no ordinary city. This was the axis of the world, a sacred machine designed to keep time, fate, and the flow of blood running in perfect cosmic synchronization. And right at the heart of this engine stood the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. To unlock the deep mystery of the temple, you must first comprehend the enigmatic deity to whom it was dedicated, the Feathered Serpent. Known in later eras by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl and to the Maya as Kukulkan, this figure is the most complex character in Mesoamerican mythology. Yet, centuries before the rise of the Aztecs, the Feathered Serpent was already walking the streets of Teotihuacan as a central and absolute divine force. But here lies the ultimate paradox. How can a god be both a crawling reptile and a soaring bird? Think about that deeply. Serpents slither through the absolute darkness of the underworld. By constantly shedding their skin, they symbolize rebirth, duality, and inevitable death. Birds, conversely, glide through the endless sky, closest to the solar disk, representing freedom, divinity, and life-giving wind. To merge the earthbound with the celestial, death with life, and chaos with order within a single entity was to create a cosmic force that was terrifyingly powerful. The Feathered Serpent was no ordinary god. He was a sacred bridge stretching between entirely different realms. On the deep reliefs of the temple's facade, you see dozens of his stone carvings, round bulging eyes, bared menacing teeth, and plumed headdresses projecting outwards. While some historians argue these figures represent the god himself, others suggest they depict warriors or high priests adorned in divine regalia to validate their own authority. Either way, these faces are absolutely everywhere. The entire temple is covered in these hybrid serpent birds, as if the massive stone structure itself vibrates with a divine breath. Yet, the Feathered Serpent was not merely a master of the skies. He was intimately tied to bloody sacrificial rituals. Blood was the only fuel capable of keeping the cosmic wheels turning. Although Quetzalcoatl would be remembered in later centuries as a gentle deity who brought civilization, his role in Teotihuacan was far darker and more ruthless. He demanded offerings, and these offerings were not corn or incense, but human life itself. In certain myths, He was the one who descended into the underworld to gather the bones of the dead to recreate humanity. But to bring life out of death, an absolute exchange was required. The gods had sacrificed themselves for mankind, and humans were expected to return the favor in exactly the same way. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent was not just a monument of faith. It was a cosmic machine linking heaven, earth, and the underworld through a bond of blood. Every stone placed, every serpent head protruding, and every victim buried served this system. The people of Teotihuacan did not merely worship the feathered serpent. They lived his paradox, his power, and his bloody logic. And the most unsettling truths were hidden deep beneath the earth. For centuries, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent stood as a silent, imposing mound of stone, half swallowed by the eroding hands of time. Local villagers shared whispered legends, and scientists made wild guesses. However, until archaeologists breached the thick stone layers in the late 1980s and early 2000s, no one could have ever imagined what lay buried beneath. What they uncovered was not just unexpected, it was the kind of discovery that chills you to the bone. Deep beneath the temple's foundations, they found a series of sealed chambers and dark pits filled with carefully arranged human remains. These were not the random casualties of a chaotic war or a devastating plague. They were completely planned, systematic, and cold-blooded ritual sacrifices. The victims, numbering well over 200, were almost entirely young men between the ages of 15 and 25. Some wore necklaces crafted from real human jawbones, while others had their hands tightly bound behind their backs with thick ropes. A portion of them had been completely decapitated. Scattered beside them were the absolute tools of the ritual, sharp, obsidian knives as black as the night sky. And it was at this exact point that things took an even darker turn. The arrangement of the bodies was not random, but followed strict geometric and symbolic patterns. The Kurban victims were carefully placed in specific quadrants facing the 4 cardinal directions to perfectly mimic the structure of the cosmos. Even the total number of bodies held a deep cosmic significance. This was not a chaotic massacre, but an orchestrated, meaningful death. The victims were surrounded by rare offerings: jaguar bones, serpents, exotic seashells fetched from the distant Gulf Coast, small figurines, and pristine obsidian blades that had never seen actual battle. This was not a punishment, it was a supreme gift offered to the gods. These young men, likely captured elite warriors, were chosen not to die in shame, but to become part of a transcendent cosmic cycle. For the people of Teotihuacan, building a temple was an act that directly required the spilling of human blood. It was as if every stone had to be consecrated with life, and every rising tear had to be sealed by giving a soul to the earth. As the excavations went deeper, the scale of sacrifice grew. In one chamber, archaeologists discovered complex tunnels lined with mercury and mica, materials deeply associated with the underworld. The floor shimmered exactly like water reflecting the night sky. Was this a mystical reflection of the stars, or a symbolic passage to the land of the dead? Every excavated square meter whispered that the temple was not built on top of death, but was constructed precisely to encase and preserve it. Blood had not stained the stones by accident. Those stones were placed there to hold the blood, absorb it, and offer it to the gods. When you look a little closer at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, you notice a highly unsettling truth. This structure does not simply sit upon the landscape. It aligns directly with the entire universe. The city of Teotihuacan was not built randomly. Its entire layout was positioned upon a massive astronomical axis. The city's main artery, the Avenue of the Dead, runs at a precise 15-degree deviation from true north. This was not an engineering error, but a deliberate calculation meant to capture the setting of the Pleiades star cluster or the sun's position on specific ritual dates. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent sat directly on this avenue, becoming an absolute component of the celestial blueprint. But why? What were they trying to align with? Archaeologists have been debating this question for decades. Some scientists argue the temple faces the equinox sunrise, while others claim it connects to Venus, the most sacred planet for Mesoamerican civilizations, deeply tied to war, sacrifice, and rebirth. Whenever Venus appeared or set in the sky, wars were declared, victims chosen, and temples activated with sacred fires. Even the repetition of the number 7, the number of planets visible to the naked eye, within the temple's step platforms was part of this conscious design. There was a magnificent harmony between earthly mathematics and celestial cycles, and deeper clues were hidden beneath the ground. In 2003, archaeologists discovered a massive tunnel under the temple. This was no ordinary passageway. It was a deliberately designed simulation of the underworld. The walls of the tunnel were once coated in powdered pyrite. Under torchlight, this mineral sparkled exactly like a star-filled sky. Combined with pools of liquid mercury and mica-lined walls, the tunnel seemed designed to recreate the Milky Way galaxy right beneath the Earth. Walking through it must have felt like a mystical journey to the realm of the dead or the center of rebirth. Was this temple not just a place of slaughter, but a massive portal linking the earth, the sky, and the spirit realm? According to certain academics, the people of Teotihuacan viewed time as cyclical rather than linear. Every ritual performed, every building erected, and every drop of blood spilled was not a one-time event. It was part of an endless loop. Death led straight to renewal, and sacrifice fueled rebirth. These precise alignments helped predict celestial movements, determine harvest times, and most importantly, calculate exactly when to offer blood to the heavens. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent was not merely watching the stars. It was actively trying to speak to them. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent was not just a spiritual center. It was an incredibly powerful political weapon. Its external design was engineered to completely intimidate, overwhelm, and remind both local citizens and foreign outsiders exactly who held the reins of absolute power in Teotihuacan. Imagine yourself standing in the shadow of this temple 1,800 years ago. As a stranger arriving from a small city-state, the moment you stepped onto the Avenue of the Dead, you would already be completely awed by the city's massive scale. But when you came to a halt before the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, you would freeze in absolute terror. The stone serpent heads stared blankly down at you, baring their fangs, while jaguar symbols snarled from the walls. The wide plaza out front gathered immense crowds, not just for celebrations, but for public sacrificial executions. Standing there, you could witness a live sacrifice with your own eyes. The ruling elites of Teotihuacan had discovered a crucial truth early on. Fear is absolute power, and nothing shakes the masses quite like the terror of divine wrath. By executing victims in broad daylight, surrounded by cosmic symbols and images of death, a clear message was sent to the entire world. The gods are with us, and we are never afraid to feed them. Yet this was not chaos. It was a flawlessly staged piece of state theater. High priests wearing plumed headdresses and dark obsidian masks would chant, dance, and spill blood, turning cosmic myths into political propaganda. The goal was not merely to please the gods. It was to remind everyone in the plaza that the city's rulers possessed a direct link to the divine. They were the only ones who could open the heavens to bring rain, protect the kingdom, or completely crush their enemies. The architecture itself directly supported this propaganda. Rulers standing on the high platforms of the temple looked down upon the crowds below. They controlled not only the narrative, but the very physical space where that narrative unfolded. The people below raised their eyes to look at the gods, the rulers, and the sacrifices, understanding their exact place in society. Teotihuacan did not need vast armies or swords to conquer the outside world. It conquered through the sheer power of symbols. Emissaries visiting the city returned home to describe the terror and grandeur they had witnessed. They spoke of feathered serpents, endless avenues, and blood rituals that painted the sky crimson. In a world ruled by the fear of the gods, Teotihuacan declared itself the sole voice of those deities on earth, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was where that voice echoed loudest and most terrifyingly. At its absolute peak, Teotihuacan was the beating heart of Mesoamerica, a city of fire, stone, gods, and blood that seemed destined to endure forever. However, around 550 CE, something went terribly wrong. The gears of the cosmic wheel broke, and the deep silence that followed was just as chilling as the stone serpent heads themselves. The collapse of Teotihuacan did not happen through a grand, glorious war. It fractured slowly at first, then vanished entirely. The very first cracks causing the city's massive cosmic engine to fail had begun appearing decades before the final destruction. Archaeological findings point to severe long-term droughts, agricultural famine, and intense social unrest. The centralized power, religious oppression, and cosmic order systems that kept this grand city alive began to buckle under pressure. And then the fire arrived. Archaeologists have uncovered extensive burn layers across elite residential compounds, temples, and administrative structures, including signs of violent destruction at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. What remains highly unusual is that the lower-class residential neighborhoods were left almost completely untouched by this inferno. This was not an invasion by an external enemy. It was a massive popular uprising, an internal revolution. The common people, who had once watched the sacrificial rituals in the plaza with awed and terrified eyes, had finally revolted against the priest-kings who exploited them. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent, once the unshakable symbol of divine authority, was thoroughly ransacked. Sculptures were smashed, sacred spaces were set ablaze, and ritual chambers were ruthlessly defiled. And then, an absolute silence enveloped the city. Teotihuacan was not completely abandoned in a single night, but it lost its soul entirely. Trade networks shattered, artistic production ceased, the grand rituals stopped, and the ruling class vanished from history. The temple spoke no more. Yet, the mystery only deepened. While the city slowly faded away, the memory it left behind survived for centuries. Ages later, the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico and encountered these colossal ruins, leaving them completely awed and shaken. They believed only the gods could have constructed such an immense place. They named it Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. Though they never knew the identity of the original builders, they generated their own sacred myths around the pyramids and revered the area as holy ground. Yet the ultimate irony of history lay right here. The most powerful city of its time, built entirely on cosmic order and blood, vanished without leaving a single written word or a final record, leaving behind only mute stones and unanswered questions. The gods had finally gone silent. For over a millennium, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent lay deeply buried beneath layers of dust, volcanic ash, and a profound silence. Local villagers avoided the area, farmers plowed the surrounding fields, and the world completely forgot its existence until the era of modern archaeology arrived to unearth the secrets hidden within this stone heart. In the early 20th century, Mexican archaeologists initiated the first excavations at Teotihuacan, and they were utterly astounded to find a city far older than the Aztecs, engineered with absolute perfection. However, it would take until the 1980s and 2000s for the temple to yield its most intimate and chilling secrets. One of the most spectacular discoveries occurred in 2011 when researchers located a completely Moherlu, hidden tunnel beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. This passage had been deliberately closed off with massive stones roughly 1,800 years ago, as if to ensure absolutely no one would ever step inside again. After years of delicate excavation, scientists finally reached a cosmic corridor, a symbolic underworld coated in pyrite that sparkled like a star-filled sky under torchlight. filled with pools of liquid mercury. Inside lay thousands of ritual objects: green jade statues, rubber balls, pitch-black obsidian blades, and finely carved wooden masks. This place felt less like a tomb and more like a dark message left for future generations. Why had the ancient builders undertaken such a massive effort? What were they trying to hide or protect so desperately? Some experts believe this tunnel was utilized during the investiture rituals of priests and kings. Others argue it symbolized the creation of the world, a mythological womb where gods were born, kings were blessed, and the divine order was negotiated between humanity and the cosmos. Mercury, once thought to be merely a toxic substance, perhaps represented the fluid boundary, the sacred waters separating the realms. And amid all these shimmering pieces, a single whisper echoed. The feathered serpent was not just an ancient myth, but a living presence residing in the temple's geometry, its murals, and its stones. The serpent had not vanished. It had curled inward into the very bones of the city, waiting to be rediscovered. And with every new excavation, every jawbone uncovered, or every shimmering ornament pulled from the dirt, we take one step closer to its message. A message never spoken aloud, but carved entirely into stone, sacrifice, and shadow. Modern science has granted us X-rays, drones, and ground-penetrating radar. Yet, despite all these advanced tools, a single truth remains unchanged. The temple continues to guard its secrets. Today, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent stands as a permanent monument, not just to a civilization long gone, but to an ancient way of thinking that fused power, the cosmos, and death into one unshakable system. Tourists take photos, and children run around in front of the stone serpent heads. Yet the ground beneath their feet remains thoroughly mixed with thousands of untold stories and the blood of over 200 known human sacrifices. And the temple endures against time in all its grandeur. The legacy it leaves behind is not merely architectural. It is a psychological, spiritual, and cultural inheritance. This paradox god of the sky and the earth continued to evolve. He was first adopted by the Toltecs and later reborn by the Aztecs under the name Quetzalcoatl. There, his legend took on a softer tone, transforming into a savior who brought knowledge to humanity, wept for mankind, and promised to one day return without fail. This bold reimagining of the ancient serpent god serves as absolute proof that myths never truly perish. Instead, they slowly adapt and transform. Even within the borders of modern Mexico, the unmistakable echoes of this feathered reptile persist deeply within contemporary art, sweeping public murals, evocative literature, and the very core of the national identity. The iconic image of the temple has been proudly stamped onto circulating coins, commemorative postage stamps, and the stone facades of major government buildings. It has slowly evolved into a universal symbol of historical mystery, pre-Columbian architectural brilliance, and the wild, untamed spiritual world that once pulsed with immense vitality through Mesoamerica. Yet, there remains another legacy left behind, one that is far less visible to the eye and considerably more uncomfortable to ponder. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent relentlessly forces us to stand face to face with the true cost of human belief. It asks deeply challenging questions that offer no easy answers. How far will human beings willingly go just to feel a desperate connection to the divine? What happens to a society when absolute political power and religious devotion become entirely indistinguishable from one another? Can supreme structural beauty truly coexist alongside absolute terror? In many profound ways, the ancient temple is not merely a static historical site meant for tourism. It is a dark, flawless mirror, a direct reflection of humanity itself. It exposes our eternal fascination with life after death, our desperate hunger for existential meaning, and our unique capacity to construct monuments of staggering beauty while simultaneously staining their foundations with human blood. The ancient temple teaches us that true greatness is always accompanied by dark shadows. It shows that human civilizations can soar to impossible, staggering heights while quietly burying their most horrifying secrets deep beneath the stone steps. And perhaps that hidden darkness is the precise reason we find ourselves returning to its ruins time and time again. We come not just to look at the stones, but to truly understand, because deep down in our souls, we know the serpent is still watching us from the shadows. It remains there not to strike us down, but to remind us. It serves to remind us of exactly what we once were capable of, and what we might still become. Before humanity ever learned to communicate through words, we spoke to one another in raw rhythm. Tens of thousands of years ago, long before the historic invention of writing systems, and even before the formal birth of complex spoken language itself, early humans began creating something that could only be described as sound produced with pure intention. It was not structured speech, nor was it a melodic tune. It was simply rhythm. A rough palm slapping against hollow tree bark, a sturdy wooden stick tapping rhythmically against a stone, a heavy foot stomping the dirt in perfect time. Somewhere deep within that ancient, repetitive echo, something truly magical was born. The very first drumbeat resonated through the world. It was not given a name like music. It was not called anything at all back then, but it felt like something real, like a form of raw communication, like physical movement, like human emotion taking a tangible shape. Modern anthropologists have uncovered physical evidence of primitive percussion instruments that date back more than 30,000 years into the past. These ancient objects were likely crafted from the simple natural materials found nearby. Hollowed-out tree trunks, dried gourds, and tightly stretched animal hides. There was nothing fancy about them, and nothing meant to be preserved for the future. Yet, these rudimentary drums were never used as mere toys or idle distractions for the tribe. They served vital, real-world purposes. They were used to warn of danger, to summon the scattered people, and to connect with one another. Imagine a small tribe deeply scattered across a dense, dark forest. A single resonance from a distant drum was all it took for the others to know that danger was approaching, that a celebration had begun, or that the gods were actively listening to them. The earliest drums were never viewed as mere tools. They were treated as direct extensions of the human body itself. A heartbeat pulled outside the chest, a pulse that could be physically felt vibrating across an entire valley. Drumming was never an event that you merely watched or listened to passively. It was a visceral experience that you participated in collectively around raging fires, under starlit skies, and deep inside dark caves where the heavy echoes made the air itself vibrate against your skin. These ancient rhythms quickly became a profound language of raw emotion. Joy, grief, warning, and hope were all expressed not through syllables or written symbols, but through patterned sound. Before the first bone flutes were ever carved, and long before stringed instruments were ever dreamed of, the drum was already fully alive, anchoring humanity in time, giving shape to sacred rituals, and uniting isolated individuals into cohesive tribes. In that precise way, the drum became humanity's very first instrument, and perhaps our first true form of collective identity. No matter where on earth groups of people lived, they always created something to strike, something to beat, and something to mark the passing moment. Because even when we had absolutely no words, we always had rhythm. And that rhythm was everything. In the early cradle of human civilization, drums were far more than simple musical instruments. They were revered as sacred voices. Every single tribe, every distinct culture, and every isolated corner of the earth developed its own unique rhythm. Yet, the core purpose behind them remained nearly universal: to commune directly with the unseen spirit world. In Africa, where some of the world's earliest percussive drums first emerged, rhythm was deeply and inextricably intertwined with the cycles of life, death, and ancestral worship. The gem, carefully carved from a single living tree trunk and tightly wrapped in goat skin, was believed by the people to contain three distinct spirits: the spirit of the tree from which it was shaped, the spirit of the animal whose hide gave it a voice, and the spirit of the master craftsman who brought it to life. When played in tight ceremonial circles, the gem did not simply accompany the rituals, it became the ritual itself. Then there were the famous talking drums, which were fully capable of mimicking the cadences of human speech through shifts in pitch and tone. In West Africa, these remarkable instruments carried complex messages across vast miles, rapidly relaying news, warnings, births, and deaths from one village to the next. Long before the invention of the telephone, humans were already drumming their thoughts across the landscape. Across the wide oceans, Native American tribes treated the drum as a fully living entity. It was revered as the literal heartbeat of Mother Earth, played continuously in ceremonies to honor the ancestors, summon spiritual healing, or safely guide the souls of the dead to the next realm. The large powwow drum, played simultaneously by a circle of dedicated drummers, functioned as both a musical and a spiritual engine, a communal pulse that aligned human beings with nature and the spirit world. In Australia, the Aboriginal people utilized sacred clapsticks and percussive foot stomps during the dream time, a mythic era of creation and ancestral beginnings. Meanwhile, in the freezing Arctic, Inuit shamans repeatedly struck large frame drums to deliberately enter deep trance states, seeking prophetic visions or communicating with nature spirits during the long, pitch-black winters. These events were never performances meant for entertainment. They were vital acts of survival, spiritual healing, historical storytelling, and deep cosmic connection. To drum was to remember who you were. To drum was to belong to the group. And above all else, it was entirely communal. Drums brought people together into sacred circles, synchronizing their heartbeats and collective intentions. There was no written sheet music and no raised stage. There were only bodies moving together, hands striking animal skins and souls stirring, all completely unified by the power of rhythm. It did not matter where on earth you stood. If you heard a drum echoing in the distance, you knew something sacred was unfolding. Something was happening that words alone could never hope to express. From the safety of sacred circles to the chaos of bloody battlefields, the drum has always spoken with absolute authority, sometimes offering comfort and other times demanding total obedience. As human societies gradually evolved into complex kingdoms and massive empires, drums were transformed into calculated tools of military domination, instruments of strict order, and psychological weapons of fear. The earliest armies did not possess radios or megaphones to communicate. They had drums. In ancient China, massive war drums called gu were struck with immense force to coordinate the movements of thousands of troops across vast, rugged terrains. With a single booming resonance, commanders could instantly signal a sudden charge, a tactical retreat, or a complex flanking maneuver. These drums were not just loud, they were highly strategic. Each specific rhythm meant something precise, and highly trained soldiers knew exactly how to listen for them, even through the absolute chaos of active battle. In Mesopotamia, immense temple drums were used to announce the arrival of rulers and summon the public to gather. But in times of violent conflict, those same drums echoed terrifyingly through the city walls, intimidating enemies with a deep, relentless thunder. It was not just percussion, it was a highly effective form of psychological warfare. When the Roman legions marched across continents, they brought with them the tympanum, a frame drum utilized in grand processions and by mystical cults like that of Cybele. Though it was not a battlefield instrument in the way brass horns and standards were, it carried an immense symbolic power, the distinct sound of empire, discipline, and absolute order. But no military force in history wielded drums quite like the Ottomans. Their Mater bands, widely recognized as the world's very first military orchestras, unleashed an overwhelming storm of massive drums, crashing cymbals and horns before entering battle. The relentless, terrifying pounding of the kos, giant kettle drums, and the davul, double-headed bass drums, struck pure terror directly into the hearts of opposing forces. Some European historical accounts describe soldiers freezing in absolute panic before even catching sight of the Ottoman lines, completely paralyzed by the sheer wall of sound. Drums also enforced strict power off the battlefield. In royal courts across Asia, Africa, and Europe, massive drum ensembles announced royal arrivals, marked grand coronations, and underscored solemn political rituals. To beat a drum was to declare to all, power is present. Even enslaved people in the Americas utilized drums as vital tools of resistance. On brutal plantations, rhythmic communication kept their original cultures alive and helped orchestrate secret rebellions. The drum, even under the heaviest weight of oppression, absolutely refused to be silenced. Whether it signaled divine right, military discipline, or raw fear, the drum has always carried a singular message. This is who rules, this is who marches, and this is the rhythm of power. As human civilizations branched out across continents, so too did their rhythms, evolving in form, purpose, and philosophy. In the East, drums became tools of absolute precision, deep spirituality, and sacred ceremony. In the West, they leaned heavily into military power and eventually orchestral grandeur. Two worlds, two distinct paths, one universal heartbeat. In India, the drum became a sacred instrument of divine language. The tabla, with its incredibly crisp tones and fluid grace, was used in classical music and devotional performances. But it was far more than a simple accompaniment. It was a live conversation. Each specific stroke had a name, a meaning, and a distinct syllabic identity. Indian drumming was not just percussive. It was spoken poetry trained over decades of absolute dedication. The tabla player was not just a musician. He was a linguist of pure rhythm. In Japan, the taiko drum emerged as a ceremonial giant, played in Shinto rituals, traditional theater, and active war. Playing taiko required not just technical musical skill, but immense physical discipline. The drummers moved with martial precision, their stances grounded firmly like ancient warriors. In festivals, the booming taiko echoed through mountain valleys, believed to actively drive away evil spirits and call the gods down to earth. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, the kendang drum led the hypnotic, flowing patterns of the gamelan orchestras, guiding traditional dancers and musicians through sacred temple ceremonies. These rhythms were intricately layered, interlocked, and celestial, a sonic reflection of cosmic harmony. Across the world, in Europe, drums had an entirely different story to tell. They were largely utilitarian during the medieval period, used for signaling soldiers, marking time, and enforcing strict discipline. It was not until the Renaissance and Baroque eras that drums began to enter formal classical music. Even then, they were strictly kept in the background, timpani thundering beneath royal fanfare or echoing through grand cathedrals. In this divergence, you see two entirely different philosophies. The East saw rhythm as an art form and a spiritual vessel tied to breath, chant, and meditation. The West saw it as structure and force, a tool to rally, march, and measure time. Yet, both worlds fully understood the drum's core power: to shape time, to dictate pace, to elevate ritual, and to connect humans in ways that transcend language. East or West, sacred or strategic, the drum remained central, always listening, always speaking. From mountaintop temples to isolated jungle clearings, from desert fires to candlelit cathedrals, drums have always held a sacred place where the human realm meets the divine. Long before organized religion ever took root, rhythm was already a sacred language, a primal way to pray, to summon, and to transcend reality. In Africa, drums were never viewed as simple instruments. They were treated as spiritual beings. In Yoruba traditions, for example, The bata drum was utilized to communicate directly with the orishas, the gods and ancestral spirits. The drummers were not performers, they were ordained priests. The complex rhythms they played were encoded prayers inviting the gods to descend and dance among the living. Each pattern had a specific purpose, and each beat had a direction. In Hinduism, the drum appears directly in the hands of the gods themselves. The deity Shiva, in his form as Nataraja, dances the cosmic dance of creation and destruction while holding a small, hourglass-shaped drum known as the damaru. Its steady beat represents the primal pulse of the universe itself, moving from silence to sound and from void to form. In Buddhism, the slow, rhythmic strike of the frame drum is utilized in monastic chants and deep meditation ceremonies. Its quiet strikes guide breath and awareness, acting as a metronome for the soul. It is not loud or aggressive. It simply reminds the practitioner to return to the present moment. Across the Americas, indigenous tribes use drums in vision quests, sweat lodges, and healing ceremonies. The beat is constant and steady, mimicking the protective rhythm of the womb, helping participants enter altered states of consciousness or connect with ancestral spirits. In these spaces, the drum doesn't just accompany prayer, it is the prayer. Even within Christianity, where rhythm was often historically subdued, the drum still found a sacred role. In gospel traditions, particularly in African American churches, drums became a powerful means of praise, a heartbeat behind voices lifted in absolute devotion, and a reminder of struggle, hope, and divine rhythm in every life. No matter the faith, the ritual, or the god invoked, the drum has been there, not as a decoration, but as a vessel for energy, intention, and the mysteries we cannot speak aloud. Because when words fail in worship, rhythm remains, and the divine always listens. For thousands of years, drums were solitary instruments, one body, one sound, one singular purpose. But in the heart of the industrial age, something truly revolutionary occurred. In factories, city streets, and music halls, percussion was completely reimagined. By the early 20th century, multiple drums were no longer scattered across a stage. They were united, forming something entirely new, the drum kit. It was born out of absolute necessity. In the late 1800s, military and theater bands required several percussionists to play the bass drum, snare, cymbals, and woodblocks, each handled by a different person. But performance space was tight, and budgets were tighter. So, innovative drummers began to combine these instruments into a single playable setup. By 1909, the first bass drum pedal was patented. A drummer could now strike a massive bass drum with one foot, freeing their hands to do more. The idea caught fire. Over the next few decades, drummers added hi-hats, tom-toms, cowbells, and ride cymbals, creating a setup that could mimic an entire percussion section, all from a single seat. What emerged was more than a tool. It was a drummer's throne. And then came jazz. In smoky clubs and underground dance halls of New Orleans and Chicago, the drum kit exploded into life. Jazz drummers didn't just keep time. They played the kit like a voice with syncopated rhythms, swing, and incredible sensitivity. Legends like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich turned the drum set into a lead instrument. Rhythm became a form of storytelling. As jazz evolved into rock and roll, the drum kit grew louder, heavier, and more powerful. The 1960s and 70s saw kits expand with multiple toms, splash cymbals, and double bass pedals. Drummers like John Bonham, Neil Peart, and Keith Moon pushed the limits of physical stamina and creativity. The drummer was no longer in the background, they were the engine. Today, the drum kit is a global staple, found everywhere from gospel churches to massive EDM stages, and from punk garages to stadium world tours. Even as digital kits and drum machines rise, the raw physicality of a live drum kit, the sticks, the skins, the sweat, remains completely irreplaceable. It stands as a symbol of modern rhythm, a fusion of centuries, where tradition meets innovation, and where one drummer can speak with 10 voices at once. The world beats in thousands of different dialects, and so do its drums. From continent to continent and culture to culture, the drum has taken countless forms, each carrying a highly distinct identity, sound, and purpose. These are not just instruments. They are cultural signatures crafted from local materials, shaped by local hands, and steeped in the rhythms of everyday life. In West Africa, the djem remains the heartbeat of community gatherings, speaking in sharp slaps and deep bass tones designed for storytelling and spontaneous conversation. Next to it, the dunan provides the foundational pulse, a rhythmic anchor around which others can dance. In Africa, a drum ensemble isn't just music. It's an active conversation between spirits, ancestors, and the living. In the Middle East, the darbuka, a goblet-shaped drum made from clay or metal, delivers crisp, fast-paced rhythms essential to belly dancing and classical Arabic music. Its voice is sharp and articulate, demanding precision from its player and immediate movement from its listeners. Across the Caribbean and Latin America, drums tell a different story, one born from absolute resilience and cultural fusion. The conga, bongo, and timbales reflect the seamless blend of African, indigenous, and Spanish influences. In Cuba, the sacred bata drums are used in Santeria rituals, each size of drum speaking a divine language tied directly to the orishes. In Brazil, the thunder of the surdo and the unique friction of the cuica drive massive samba parades through the streets, infusing joy into protest, prayer, and carnival alike. In India, the mridangam and the tabla dominate South and North Indian classical music respectively. These drums are so precise they are tuned to exact pitches, blurring the line between rhythm and melody. Each finger movement matters, and each stroke carries centuries of tradition. Then there's the frame drum, one of the oldest in human history, appearing in everything from the Persian daf to the Irish bodhran, and from shamanic tools to folk ensembles. Played with fingertips, mallets, or brushes, it is absolute proof that even simplicity can be sacred. What unites them all? Pure purpose. Whether guiding a dance, a healing ceremony, a ritual, or a revolution, each drum reflects the soul of its people. Their rhythms carry geography, history, and identity. The global drum family isn't just diverse, it's completely universal. Because no matter where you go on this planet, the earth still echoes with rhythm. As the 20th century drew to a close, the sound of drums began to change, not in rhythm, but in texture. The physical gave way to the programmable. The sweaty palms, the wooden sticks, and the calloused fingertips all began to share space with digital circuits, pads, and software. The age of digital drums had officially arrived. It began in the 1970s with primitive drum machines. Early devices like the Rhythm Icon and the Roland CR-78 that used analog circuits to simulate basic beats. Initial rhythms felt mechanical and strange to the unaccustomed ear. Yet, those who lived for sound recognized a different truth hiding within the precision. They saw control, mathematical predictability, and a blank canvas for creation. The true mutation arrived when the calendar turned to 1980. The release of a specific programmable rhythm box altered the trajectory of modern sound forever. Its heavy, subaudible low-end punch and sharp, metallic clap became the foundation of entirely new subcultures. From the underground clubs of Detroit and Chicago to the evolving landscapes of urban poetry, this synthetic pulse took over. The goal was no longer to mimic the acoustic imperfections of physical wood and skin. The new objective was to build a sonic universe that had never existed in nature. As technology marched forward, the tools grew increasingly complex. Electronic pads allowed performers to maintain tactile expression while triggering vast libraries of digital textures. Creativity was liberated from physical constraints. Musicians could create in absolute silence, bypass the need for acoustic spaces, and transform their entire sonic identity with a single command. Then came the democratization of production through modern computing. Software platforms turned ordinary personal computers into immense architectural workshops for sound. An individual sitting in a dark room could now weave intricate webs of low frequencies, syncopated metallic hats, and sharp snares. Manipulating grids of rubber pads evolved into a virtuosic discipline. Many believe this technological shift signaled the end of traditional musicianship. They feared human emotion would be entirely erased by the unyielding grid of a machine clock. But fate chose a different path. Instead of eradication, a dark symbiosis occurred. Acoustic players began wiring their physical instruments with digital sensors. Producers began injecting deliberate human flaws beneath the unbending accuracy of programmed patterns. The ancient and the synthesized found a common frequency. The machine did not bury history, it gave it a new armor. We now exist in an era where a lone creator can summon the weight of an entire orchestra from a desk. Grooves born centuries ago in distant lands are captured, dissected, and reanimated beneath neon lights. The medium has mutated, but the ancient drive remains absolute. To command the blood to move, to control time, and to give a voice to the void. Through every shifting empire and every technological leap, one truth remains unassailable. The rhythmic pulse is our oldest and most permanent language. From prehistoric fire circles to massive modern arenas, it has never been a mere matter of entertainment. It is an instinctual bridge to our internal depths, to each other, and to something vast. It is a literal reflection of our origin. Long before our lungs taste air, while suspended in total darkness, the very first sound we ever register is the steady cadence of a maternal heartbeat. Safe, predictable, and alive. Once we leave that sanctuary, we spend the rest of our existence chasing that lost pattern. This cadence has marched alongside armies, fueled revolutions, and echoed through both sacred cathedrals and concrete urban tunnels. It requires no translation because it speaks directly to the bone and the bloodstream. We use it to navigate deep sorrow, to celebrate collective ecstasy, and to remember who we are when the world grows too loud. The evolution of percussion never truly stops. It survives in the street corners where metallic handpans weave hypnotic ambient webs. It lives in isolated communities fighting to keep ancient rituals alive against the erosion of time. It thumps in stadiums where thousands move as a single organism. It even exists in the experiments of artificial intelligence trying to decipher the laws of groove. Yet, no mathematical formula can truly replicate the intentional imperfection of a living soul. Rhythm cannot merely be calculated, it must be felt. That is precisely why this medium outlives every fallen civilization. Humans crave the grounding anchor of shared time. No matter how simulated our reality becomes, there remains an irreplaceable magic when flesh meets wood, metal, or skin. The beat is not a relic of a bygone era. It is an eternal reminder that we are designed to move, to listen, and to feel. As long as blood flows, the pulse will never fall silent. Before the island was conquered by a forest of glass and metal, it was a landscape of low horizons. In the early decades of the 19th century, the vertical profile of the city barely disrupted the clouds. Humanity clustered tightly at the southern edge of the land, navigating a dense maze of brick residences, wooden workshops, and unpaved pathways. Structures rarely pushed beyond a few stories high. This limitation was not born from a lack of imagination, but from the unyielding laws of physics. The higher a stone structure climbed, the more crushing its own weight became. To prevent collapse, the base of the walls had to be built incredibly thick, consuming precious internal space and requiring massive subterranean foundations. Reaching for the sky was an economic impossibility. Consequently, the city spread outward, marching north along the rigid grid coordinates established in 1811. Yet, deep beneath that dirt and cobblestone, the island held a hidden foundation. A massive, ancient spine of dense granite waited in the dark. This subterranean bedrock would eventually bear the weight of the heaviest monuments ever built by human hands. But for generations, it remained dormant. Daily life stayed firmly attached to the earth. The harbor was a chaotic symphony of creaking ship hulls, commerce, and horses moving through tight corridors. The population multiplied and wealth expanded, yet the city remained flat. The only structures that dared to challenge the horizon were places of worship. The spire of a single prominent church, finished in 1846, reached nearly 300 feet into the air, standing as a lone sentinel over the low rooftops. But that was a monument of faith, not a modern skyline. The true transformation of the horizon would not rely on masonry or timber. It would require a fusion of iron, metallurgy, and unprecedented daring. For centuries, gravity dictated the shape of human civilization, keeping our ambitions tied directly to the soil. By the midpoint of the 19th century, two distinct technological breakthroughs shattered those ancient rules. One invention figured out how to lift humanity safely, while the other figured out how to lift the architecture itself. The first shift occurred in 1852 during a dramatic exhibition in a crowded exhibition hall. An engineer stood on an elevated platform high above a breathless audience and commanded the supporting cable to be severed. The rope snapped, but the platform stayed frozen in midair, locked by a hidden safety mechanism. In that single moment, the economic hierarchy of architecture inverted. The highest levels of a building, once avoided due to the grueling climb, suddenly became the most valuable spaces in the city, offering clean air, natural light, and prestige. The vertical migration was now viable, but the physical buildings were still restricted by the weight of their own walls. That boundary vanished with the birth of the steel skeleton. By the closing decades of the century, visionary builders realized that a grid of structural steel could bear the entire weight of a building internally. The exterior walls were no longer anchors. They became mere curtains hung upon a metal cage. This architectural liberation meant height was no longer a dangerous gamble, but a deliberate business plan. Manhattan, with its immovable granite bedrock and surging financial power, became the ultimate laboratory for this experiment. The geography of a narrow island forced builders to look upward, and competing corporate empires realized that the clouds were the ultimate canvas for self-promotion. The elevator provided the access, the steel cage provided the strength. The age of horizontal sprawl was over. The vertical race had begun. By the turn of the 20th century, the city had run out of room to grow outward, leaving no choice but to puncture the sky. Manhattan transformed into a high-stakes arena where corporations fought for dominance using architecture as their primary weapon. An aggressive game of vertical leapfrog began in the 1890s. A massive newspaper headquarters claimed the title of the tallest office building on Earth by climbing 20 stories over the pavement, only to be eclipsed a few years later by a rival tower reaching nearly 400 feet. Each new project was a loud proclamation of power and a bid for immortality. The skyline began to sprout titanic structures. A soaring corporate tower completed in 1908 reached over 600 feet, finally conquering the height of the historic church spire that had ruled the city for half a century. That triumph was short-lived. In 1913, a towering masterpiece dubbed the Cathedral of Commerce rose nearly 800 feet into the air, funded entirely by the cash reserves of a retail magnate. Its neo-Gothic details were an architectural sermon celebrating the nation's ascent as a dominant global force. This was branding on a celestial scale. Every additional story was a front-page headline, and every unique silhouette became an indelible corporate logo cast against the sunset. Beneath this theatrical display of wealth, a brutal rhythm of labor hummed continuously. Steam machinery tore into the ancient granite foundations while riveting crews hammered steel day and night. High above the streets, daring ironworkers balanced on narrow metal beams without safety harnesses, relying purely on nerve to construct the modern world. As the 1920s arrived, the architecture began to reflect the energy of the Jazz Age, shifting from historical mimicry to pure geometric style. Buildings became expressions of motion, light, and modern speed. The most breathtaking manifestation of this era was a sleek monument built by an automotive titan. Completed in 1930, it featured a brilliant stainless steel crown that was assembled in absolute secrecy within the structure and hoisted into place overnight. Its gleaming sunburst pattern and sharp metallic gargoyles did more than occupy space. They captivated the imagination of the world. Yet its reign at the summit lasted only months. A short distance away, during the darkest depths of an economic collapse, another giant emerged. Rising to 1,250 feet, this colossus was assembled in just over 400 days by thousands of laborers braving the elements. It stood as a towering monument of collective resilience, sending a clear message that the city would not be broken by hardship. By the close of that turbulent decade, the iconic silhouette of Manhattan was permanently etched. The city had evolved into a capital of global ambition, boasting a skyline that broadcasted human capability to the horizon. Following the cataclysm of the Second World War, the aesthetic shifted once again, abandoning historical ornamentation for a cold, rational minimalism. As the nation assumed the role of a global superpower, the architecture adopted a corporate seriousness. A boxy glass and marble landmark constructed on the edge of the river signaled this new international order. It was followed by sleek, unadorned glass boxes that functioned as precise machines for modern enterprise. These towers did not seek to charm with decorative details. They sought to project absolute discipline, efficiency, and institutional power through uniform grids and tinted glass curtains. By the late 1960s, the vertical landscape was poised for its most radical expansion. At the southern tip of the island, a massive project took shape that would push the scale of architecture to controversial limits. The twin monoliths of the World Trade Center were designed with a stark, uncompromising minimalism. Rising over 1,300 feet without traditional setbacks, these aluminum-clad pillars were built to serve as the crossroads of global capitalism. Constructing them required clearing an entire historic district and inventing a massive subterranean concrete barrier to keep the river from flooding the deep foundations. When they opened in 1973, they were criticized by some as sterile and imposing, yet their sheer presence was undeniable. They stood as two massive pillars of certainty, anchoring the lower end of the island and becoming an instant symbol of economic might recognized across the planet. That definitive silhouette was violently fractured on a single morning in September 2001. In less than 2 hours, the monumental pillars dissolved into a cloud of ash and twisted iron. The loss of human life was staggering, and the space they had occupied for nearly 3 decades was reduced to a smoldering void. This was a direct strike against the very symbols of modern ambition. For the first time in 100 years, the relentless upward march of the city came to a sudden, painful halt. The island entered a period of deep mourning, and the hollow space on the horizon became a sacred wound known to the world as Ground Zero. The recovery process was slow and emotionally charged, filled with intense debates over how to honor the fallen while reclaiming the identity of the city. The answer to that tragedy was not a retreat from height, but a return to it. A new vision emerged that blended commerce with deep remembrance, creating a sanctuary of falling water within the footprints of the original towers. Rising beside that sacred void, a new crystal obelisk began its ascent, eventually reaching a symbolic height of 1,776 feet. This new tower did not seek to replicate what was lost. Its shifting glass facets absorbed and reflected the changing colors of the sky, acting as a quiet mirror of resilience. Over the following years, a cluster of sleek companion towers rose around it, transforming the area into a testament to human survival. The vertical race has since migrated northward to the center of the island. Along the edge of the central park, a new generation of impossibly slender residential needles now pierces the upper atmosphere. These gravity-defying towers represent the absolute peak of modern structural engineering, built to withstand immense wind forces while offering views from heights previously unimaginable. While critics view them as stark monuments to economic division, they remain undeniable marvels of human capability. The modern skyline continues to expand westward, colonizing old rail yards with glittering new districts. Through every era of prosperity, economic ruin, conflict, and rebirth, this vertical forest remains the ultimate symbol of human potential. It is a living testament to a civilization that refuses to be bound by the earth, proving that the sky is never a permanent barrier, but merely the foundation for whatever comes next.